So, in the last session, we talked about a taxonomy, specifically Bloom's taxonomy, and applied it to writing objectives. And if you remember, taxonomy is all about the order of skill that you're trying to train. Especially when you're building e-learning, it is important to keep track of, or at least account for, which level in the taxonomy that you're trying to cover. For example, if you're trying to cover synthesis skills, then your e-learning has to be take special care to make sure that there are enough exercises, role plays, whatever it might be, that allows a person to gain that specific skill set and turn around with something creative and something new. If all you're doing is understanding or knowledge, uh, then that's relatively simple. And I think most of your assignments that you produce will be in those territories, maybe application as well. So, if you're going to teach somebody how to bake a cupcake, then knowledge of simply flour, butter, icing, the different tools you use is fine. But if you allow them to understand why you're mixing flour and sifting it and why the butter has to be cold, then they appreciate it a bit more. And along the way, you show them images, pictures, videos, and also it would be nice if there's smell-o-vision so they can smell it as well. But when they actually are able to then go around and turn around and make a cupcake to your specification, then you've achieved that level of Bloom's taxonomy. So take some time to look at every objective you write and see which order or which level that it applies to. Now, in today's session, we're going to cover off what we call UID, or Universal Instructional Design. Now, that goes hand in hand with accessibility. And as you know, in Ontario, there's ODA requirements. There's a law. Now, when you design e-learning, you want to make sure that it is accessible. And it's not just about physical accessibility. Sometimes it's some other type of impairment like hearing or visual, could be lack of access to technology. Could be a lot of different things. Could be language barriers. And you want to try to take away as many barriers and make your course as accessible as possible with ease of use. So UID gets into that, but it also gets into good design practices. I mean, look, if you're going to build a house, design a house, um, certainly you'd keep in mind certain good design practices like the width of a door, the placement of a door, etc. Why wouldn't we do that with e-learning? So that's what this particular lesson is going to be about, and we'll dig right into it.
So, accessibility. Put yourself in other people's shoes. As you design anything, actually, you design a building, you design a house, you design a game, you design a room, or e learning, you do it from your perspective. You feel great about it because it's yours. You own it. It was your vision. And it's good for you. You built it around you and what your needs are. But when you're designing things like buildings, other people need to access them as well. And if it's just a family, you know the family, I get it. But let's say it's an office environment and there are other people who might not be able to use this space the same way you can. So we have to develop a mindset around that. Not only is it a legal requirement in Ontario and in other places like AODA, but it's also the right thing to do to have a level playing field or equity or fairness. Now, we refer to this as, we look at it from 2 points of view. One is accessibility in terms of disability, but also what makes sense? What are the usability requirements? What we call universal instructional design. Now, when you get to e learning, think about it. You're building it, it's probably going to be online or somehow digital. There are elements in it that you appreciate, you like. But are there things within it that could block other people from experiencing it the same way within reason? I mean, it can't be so far out there that you have to make fundamental changes where it would change the way that you intended your e-learning to be used, the look and feel, for example, or the flow. So this session is going to take you through some points, and it is that it's a bunch of points. You look at them, you understand them, and then as you're building your e-learning, try to accommodate as much as you can. Now, look, I have to be honest. Uh, while we're doing this for Seneca, building online courses, etc., people are asking me, what about usability? What about AODA requirements like transcripts and closed captioning? And first thing I say is, look, the way we're building it is if you don't have accommodations from students, then you don't have a customer that requires some of those enhanced tools for accessibility. So you keep building as if you didn't. The day you do, of course, you're legally obligated to provide those accommodations. And it could be something like larger font. So in this lesson, we're going to go through some of these things. And let's start here. It's just a simple list of 6 points of questions that you can answer. First of all, usability, right? Universal instructional design. You have objectives for your course that must be met. And I don't know, look, if it's just a 1-lesson course, I get it. Maybe you might only have 1 or 2 objectives. But it could be a full-blown course. You might have 5 to 10 objectives. Does your e-learning actually do what it was intended to do? I mean, ask yourself, am I going in a tangent? If I'm going in a direction that is not generic to the root of the essence of your objectives? I mean, if you wanted to do that, that's fine. Then just create an objective. It was part of the audience experience. I mean, it's easy when you're building to go crazy, to go in all sorts of directions. You know, you're going to teach people how to bake a cake. And then you do a side lesson on how to do lasagna. It's fine. It's all great. But then have your course expand to other types of food and maybe call it Italian cooking and include baking within it. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you can easily convert it to 2 different courses. But if you say you're going to do it, if it's an objective, and one of the things I'll be looking for is, does your e-learning meet those objectives? So you can write the objectives, but if you're not covering it, then what's the point of having an objective? It's one of the dangers, isn't it? And in fact, every objective should be measurable. Like, can you assess it? Can you test people? Learnability. How easy is it for users to accomplish basic tasks? I mean, you can do it. You designed it. But if you have a lesson asking people to create a roux, well, first of all, if you don't know what a roux is, I don't know, look it up. But if your lesson doesn't actually get to the point and allow people to create a roux, you ask them to use it, but you don't really explain how to do it, then that becomes a problem. Now, if you linked it to somebody else's course, let's say on YouTube, that talked about doing a roux, then that's fine. By the way, I'm not sure why you're using a roux for baking, but whatever. You get the idea. It's a concept. Efficiency. I mean, that's a broad topic, right? So statement says, once users have learned the design, how quickly can they perform the tasks? I mean, so efficiency would be time. Would it take you a year to master that objective? And that's fine. But you'd word it in a way that you will be able to after sufficient practice. But a good e-learning product, a package, I think, allows people to demonstrate to some degree that everything you've taught can be replicated right away. Unless you're doing e-learning on molecular biology, and it might take 5 years from them to design some sort of a new vaccine. So keep that in mind. Is it readily doable to achieve the task, to do the task? Memorability. I mean, if you design a course, and all good courses should allow a user to leave it for a while and then go back, let's say a few weeks. As long as there's no fence on the other side where you have to finish something. But is the material you're already taught easily recollectable? I don't know if that's a word. Recallable. Is there memorability? And we establish that by using images. I think images go a long way. You know, we're not digging deep into the psychology of learning, but imagery, certainly videos, and repetition, an exercise. So if people were to leave for a long time, then in the next lesson, why don't you do a quiz up front, testing them to see how much they remember from the previous lesson, right? That's easy to do. Errors. How many errors do users make? So for example, especially in the navigation of the course, if the course is so complex and you see people are making errors all the time, they skip things because they didn't find it, they're missing things. Maybe there's technical issues around it, bandwidth, internet. They can't make a video work. I mean, that's all something you have to take into account. So the way around this is test the heck out of it. Test it with different browsers. Test it with different audiences. And then satisfaction. I think this goes without saying. If you're going to design a house for somebody based on your vision, does a person actually who's gonna live in the house, how do they appreciate it? Are they satisfied? Is it pleasant? Are the aesthetics there? Is the color scheme, the flow, user friendliness? I think that's what it should be, user friendly. And again, that's somewhat difficult because you build it based on what you think you would like, and you don't have access to a wide audience. But that's why we do things in teams. You might show family members bits and pieces of your e-learning and ask them, how do you feel about this? And don't be upset with feedback. People will always give you feedback, right? But if more than one person will be happy with the experience of your e-learning, then that's a good indication. It validates that it could be somewhat universal. Now, I'm not sure I'm violating accessibility rules here. Take a look at the colors. I've got green and whatever that color is, brown. I think it's readable. I could have easily split this slide into 2 or 3 different slides, I suppose. Maybe make the font bigger. But the generic accessibility design aspects of UID, Universal Instructional Design, are, well, here we go. All the file contents, digital files, websites should be keyboard accessible. Meaning, you could, if you're going to use something like a VR, and the VR requires those handsets that you put on your hands, to make sure that your users are able to actually, first of all, put a headset on, but also use the different technology. Now, keyboards, they mention keyboards here for a reason, because no matter what the disability, whether it's visual, auditory, physical, keyboards, different kinds, have been made so that they can be used. You could close your eyes, and if you know how to type, you can pretty much use a keyboard. The file types that you use, are they unique? Is it possible that you stuck some file types for download, like a CAD file, for example, or some sort of weird extensions, JSONs or whatever, and you figured it out on your computer? And we forget often that we have all the plugins, everything installed on our computer, because that's what we do. But imagine your users now, you're asking them to download some sort of a file in a format that their machine can't handle. 2 things. One is, don't use those unique, obscure type of files. Or up front in your e-learning, explain to people how to use this, including links to downloads. For example, Adobe. Nowadays, it's pretty universal. Every computer can open Adobe files, PDF files. Used to be a day where you had to download all sorts of plugins to get to it. And when a user finds it frustrating to access your content, they tend to ignore it. So I think if we stuck to PDF, first of all, and MP4 as video, or an MP3 as audio, I think you're pretty safe. And again, testing. When I mark your stuff, when I look at it, I try to run it on various machines. And that's how I see if it's accessible or not. On the most part, I think you're pretty good at it. You get it. You get these different files, and you felt the frustrations as well. Now, the next part, that digital files are human accessible and machine readable, I don't think you need to worry about it. That's more if you're teaching engineering people, and there's some strange software that you're using, and some of those files you can't open them readily. But then if you're engineering, you would know what that is anyways. So the names of your documents, if you just say document A, document B, that doesn't help. Imagine a person who can't see, and they're relying on a talking tool, a tool that talks to them about the file names. Well, it's going to talk based on what the file name is. You leave proper spaces, proper punctuation. You don't use commas. Call the file what it is. If the file is tools that you use to bake a cupcake, then call it tools used to bake a cupcake. Then your text documents, of course, should have proper headings. That's what structure means. A proper title, proper headings, a space. and then your paragraph. In fact, all images that you use should have alternate text. And I'll show that to you in a future session. So each image, like a picture, think about it. There's a picture, there's a file name, but there's also a thing called alt text, ALT text, where you describe what the image is. So people who can't see it, the computer can read out to them and describe what that image is. It doesn't take long to do. I like the next one. Use clear, simple English. I mean, you're all producing in the English language. Yes? Yes, for my project. If it was French, it would be French. But use English that's understandable by your audience, and that's why it's important to document who your audience is. If you're using high-level kind of management style or technical English and people might not understand, or it's got idioms, idiosyncrasies or ethnosyncrasies, little statements and phrases that you understand because you grew up here, but other people might not. Now, the audio and video transcription, that's important to me. Now, for our project, you only have to do one, the first video that you use. But a transcription is every word spoken in your video is written down line by line, kind of like a script, a play, if you ever read a play. So if there's two people engaging back and forth, each person would have a line. Now, can you do this automatically? Yes, there's tools that can do that, and I'll do a section on that. But most likely before you record a video or audio, you will have written down your stuff anyways. You're speaking from a script. Well, your script in itself becomes the transcript. So imagine this: in your e-learning, you have a video, and then below it you have a link that says download the transcript. That's all it is. And you'd give it a good name, transcript for session 1, whatever the topic is. Now you can also have closed captioning, where the words pop up, kind of like a foreign film. You can do that as well. PowerPoint, that's a good accessible PowerPoint. Slideshows, the right size font, the right colors. Generally the minimum size for your font, I believe, is 18, but I'm going to go at least 20. I use 20 to 28. You might, for look and feel, like a really tiny font because it looks cool. It doesn't help other people, including me. Keep in mind, I'm a lot older. If I can't see it from 4 or 5 feet away, I'm not going to read it. Color? I don't know if you know about color, but dark colors versus light colors, contrast, a dark font on a dark background not working. You might like it. That's not good enough. Use good colors that are readable, followable. If you have tables, if you're using tables, make sure there's a good title for the table. And then summarize the table in a paragraph, a short paragraph. Now the next one, control of time. It means, look, if it's a video that's playing, allow pause features. Not everybody can process a 1-hour video the same way. ADHD, for example, somebody might need to watch 5-minute increments and then be able to pause. Then the live online, we're not doing that, but notice when I did my live session, I had the PowerPoint decks ready. The fonts were clear. I actually tested it. Make sure it's usable. Now take a look at this screen. The first box, somebody actually did this. And it's got a red background. They seem to like it. It looked okay to them. Me, I'm going kind of dizzy looking at this red thing. I can't read it. But at the bottom, it's the exact same thing as the red. But at the bottom, it looks good. I can read it. You might not like it because the red's missing, but you can use a certain shade of red if you wanted to, that's lighter. And this is another no-no. I have a link in the middle called click here. I'm not going to click it. It goes to CNN. But you can't just say click here. Click here to what? Click where? If you have a visual impairment, nobody knows where to click. So you want to say access CNN.com. Or the name of the file if it's a link to a file, right? Now, when you're building your e-learning, and again, you be the judge of this to some extent, but a welcoming classroom isn't just dropping somebody into the lesson right away. There's a nice introduction, a nice graphic, a pause actually. Somebody can sit in that room, that first screen, just look at it and say, I'm good to go. And it would be nice to have a button called start, or at least directing somebody where to go. So I'm a big fan of next to your main slide, which has the welcome screen, welcome message, little description. I like to have a page that says how to use this course. And if it means you have to cover a session each week and there's an exercise, describe it. If you need to download some sort of a software or access some books or materials, describe it in that how to. People feel better about it. They know what to expect. And communicate those expectations clearly. One a week. There'll be a quiz at the end. We're going to have a live viewing at a restaurant, a banquet hall, whatever, in 5 weeks. I need to know that. It's a 5-week program. And I think to some extent, if your course deserves it, have some sort of feedback mechanism. So if you're dropping assignments in there, one after each session, let's say an assignment, and a person does it, that's fine. They do it. Maybe there's a checklist of things so they can check off saying, I know this. But does that assignment go anywhere? Is there a feedback process? Or if you don't want to do this as a live course, just let people enroll and finish the course on their own. Is there a way that they can finish the assignment and then it opens up an example of a perfect assignment so they can compare? That's a way to do it. You don't have to sit and do that live. And then, of course, there's all sorts of supports. It's called scaffolding, like a building in construction, where we put scaffolds all the way around so people don't fall. We're guarding them. In learning, some natural supports would be, well, a guided approach. I mean, give people a step-by-step. Draw a picture if you have to. I do calendars. I tell you what's approaching, when due dates are. But then also there's accessibility tools like speech or text-to-speech, where it reads off for you, or Zoom capability. Those are supports. And one of the best supports, I think, could be a communication. So can the person email you, communicate with you? Is there a discussion area? Is there a live session where they can connect with you if they have problems? And by the way, the next step says diverse learning styles. All of this is intended for diverse learning styles. Look, there's people who learn by just watching videos. That happens to be a new thing these days. But not everybody. Some people still like that old textbook or set of notes that they can read and highlight. So why not have both? If you're going to do a video, you have notes as well. Now, we're not talking about you as learners. We get you. This is like, remember, this is a course you're designing for your employees. It could be overboard to have notes and a video at the same time. Not necessarily. I mean, you're going to create the video anyways. Now, when it comes to demonstrate their knowledge, either to assess, to see where they're at, or evaluate, see how good they are, right? Assessment versus evaluation. If there's only one way for a person to be evaluated or to demonstrate what they learned, that's okay. But you might have people who are not able to demonstrate it that way. So for example, and if you ever had an IEP or an accommodation, you know what I'm talking about. It's if you're giving paper and pencil tests or online tests, there are people out there who can't do that. Their focus doesn't stay long enough. Their concentration goes. Now, unless it's an absolute must that they must do it that way in the workplace, then you have to do it. For example, if you're a writer, you can't have an issue with reading and writing for long periods of time, and you can't be a writer then. That's a bona fide requirement. But there's ways. Rather than just testing you, I could give you an oral exam, which would be like ask you the question verbally and you answer verbally. I can ask you to do a video answering the questions. Maybe writing's the issue. And I don't mean second language writing. I mean like physically writing. You just can't. Could tests be done online? For example, I'll give you a perfect example. Let's say it's a geography course, and I need you to write down where different countries are, different continents, the capital, so on. I could easily put a map of the world and make a quiz. It's called a hotspot, where I create hotspots in every country and I ask you a question. Click on Uruguay or Chile, and you have to know the map. Rather than making you write it down, I get you to click on it. Rather than making you write down the steps to create a cupcake, I mean, what's the value in that? I actually get you to make cupcakes. Shoot a video of you doing it so I know it's you, and then send me the cupcakes, if that's part of it, the taste of the cupcakes. So you're going to be very creative of how to demonstrate or get students to demonstrate. Now, not all of you are going to build e-learning where you do have tests or some sort of exercise assignment. Some exercises could simply be do it on your own, but here's the proper way to do it. But if you do, make sure there's multiple ways to do it. And then there's this thing called Web 2.0, promoting interaction. So anytime in the digital world, especially e-learning, where you're allowing people to communicate or engage with each other versus you doing this by yourself, that's called Web 2.0, interactivity. Now, some of you will build e-learning with interactivity. I get it. Some of you will build standalone e-learning where once you enroll, you're on your own. But then make sure the course has the natural supports. So I'll give you some examples of interaction here. There's two kinds, synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous means live. It's like a telephone call. You talk, I listen, I talk, you listen. Asynchronous is communicating, but it's not live, meaning the other person doesn't receive it right away. So email is asynchronous. Telephone is synchronous. What I'm doing right now is asynchronous. You're not there in front of me right now. You will eventually get this and listen to it. But then I allow you to participate on a discussion board. But I'm not sitting there all the time. I'll get to it. That's asynchronous. You might have a web call, a WebEx or a Zoom or Skype. That's pretty synchronous. You might actually build that in. So let's say once every 2 weeks the class meets and we do a live demonstration. Now, for your own project, you don't actually have to do that. You can write it up saying that this is what I'd like to do. In fact, if you use Blackboard, there's an area there where you can create a live meeting space, one for each week or whatever period, every 2 weeks. With the one link, people click on it, they come in. You either share audio, video, or just chat. You decide. You might have people coming into a virtual immersive environment. You know, with your avatar, you log in and your avatar walks around and other people from the class are there and you interact with them. I'm going to do a demonstration for you soon. It's called Second Life, and Seneca owns an island on it. But some sort of interaction's good. It could be as simple as you can email me anytime and I'll get back to you. By the way, in the case of the baking course, how cool would it be if every 4 weeks at the end of each month we meet at a kitchen, commercial kitchen, right? So it's not the whole class. It's very expensive to do. But once in a while we meet so we can share. In fact, I think almost every Loblaws has a kitchen that you can rent. Now, what we just talked about, much of it is covered by a law in Ontario. Every province has one. It's called OdaA Oda. You should know this law, so I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of what the law suggests directly. But it's the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. Boy, I had to practice that one. And basically, it's a law that says what are some protections you have to put in place to make a physical space and other spaces accessible without undue hardship. So if it's really, really hard for your company to build a wheelchair ramp in the front of your building so people in wheelchairs can get into it, because if they can't, they're not getting the same customer experience, or the employees, they can't work for you, that becomes discriminatory. Unless you're a small business and you can't afford the ramp. But in the case of e-learning, we mentioned a bunch, right? We're not talking about ramps. Unless your e-learning requires you to come in to a physical premises at some point, then you have to make sure that it's there. People can get into the building. Or if you can't, that you'll have a mechanism where you meet them outside and deal with them with reasonably the same quality of experience. But in e-learning, we look at visual disabilities, and I'm not even sure that's a good word, but it is. Auditory, physical, and we'll even add to that access too. Size of fonts, images have alternate text, links have proper wording, contrast of colors. So if you have an online course and there's no way a certain person can't access it at all, I mean, you have to consider that. How else can I deploy it? Now, let me just repeat though, if you know your audience has nobody who needs those levels of accommodations, you don't necessarily have to build today for that, but you have to be prepared that if somebody needs that accommodation, you have to be willing to supply it and support it. So for your assignment, you don't have to build all these in. There's certain requirements I'm going to ask for: the colors, the size, the alternate text, and the transcription. But there will be a section in there where you will discuss how you could make this AODA compliant or accessibility compliant. Right? Sometimes just writing it up for my project is enough for me to visualize this is a possibility. But I've got my 4 minimums you have to do. I'll just repeat them. Every image has to have alternate text. Your first video has to be transcribed fully, or all of them if you want, in a PDF document put right below the video. The fonts have to be certain size, and by a certain meaning reasonable, not tiny. And that the font colors and the contrasting background colors have to be viewable. Okay? And the simplicity of your navigation, your menu. You know, why complicate things by putting in 50 million things? Make it simple. Call them sessions, call them lessons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in a nice order, easy to follow. So I hope this session helped to just get some perspective on how to put in certain protections to help as many learners as possible engage in your e-learning. Okay, we'll see you in the next session, where we will cover learning management systems, course management systems. Now, if you don't know what LMS, CMSs are, if you design e-learning where you don't need to track who's in, user IDs, passwords, how long somebody looked at certain content, who downloaded what, grade books. If you just want a course where people access it, you just do it, then you don't need a proper LMS or CMS. You don't need that functionality. Something like Adobe Captivate or simple set of videos might just be a website. But we might need them. You want to do live collaborations, live chats, and discussion boards and things like that? You need a good LMS. Now, we also have to talk about authoring or stitching tools. Stitching is where you take all your content, all your ideas for a course, and some software, some tool has to allow you to put them together. Like a website, right? How do you design a website? You need a tool to do a website. SharePoint Designer, Dreamweaver. There's a whole bunch of these. Good thing is there's automated systems now. You just put all your content in, it does a lot of the coding for you. And then we'll talk about objects. So within your e-learning, you might want things like animations, immersive environments, VR, graphics. Those are called objects, little objects that you develop. I'll even show you how to edit video to make it professional. Again, we're not talking about hundreds of hours to do this. We're simplicity. This is how you get started. Later on in life, of course, let's say you're working for a company, and we had a graduate who went and got, I should tell you about this later, but she went and got a master's in e-learning because she wanted to do it. She's working for the provincial government right now. We're talking 7 years out, six figures plus in salary. And on her team, she's an architect and she gets how to do all of this. But she also has people who do all the graphics for her, all the video work. It's all being done. You become the director, the producer now. Okay, so I'm going to do those in separate sessions. So it won't be one big session for LMS, CMS. It'll be different ones like course sites, Udemy, Adobe, Captivate, so on. And I'll keep adding as I discover more. And I want you to discover stuff too. And when you discover some tool out there and you like it, two things. One is share it with the class. That's your engagement. But also, if you can't figure some elements of it out, the technical side, send it to me. I'm your consultant. I don't charge. And I'll try to figure it out. I have fun doing it. And I have some IT friends. I'm not an IT guy, but I'll ask them, how do you do this? And if we can't figure it out, we'll just say, don't do it. But if we can, how awesome is that? Because next year's students will benefit from that as well.